So he climbed his way out of this using the infinite banking concept that he discovered in this way at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning on his knees in prayer. So this last little paragraph here is a bit of encouragement for all of us who think we have to be wealthy to become our own banker. We have to be in a nice, tidy, wonderful financial situation to become our own banker. Here's what he says. Maybe you have found yourself in such a financial prison, or maybe you want to develop a system that will keep you out. Either way, maybe yours is smaller or greater, whatever, doesn't matter. The principles are the same and they will serve you well. It requires understanding and it requires discipline to implement the idea, but it can change your life dramatically, even beyond your fondest dreams. Welcome to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we rethink money, ditch the system, and rediscover what it means to truly thrive well. I'm Tricia Miller, mom of 7, financial coach, and founder of ThriveWell. Around here, we believe wealth is more than numbers. It's about freedom, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts. If you're ready to challenge the norm and take back control of your financial life, you're in the right place. Hello and welcome to the Bankless by Design podcast. Today, we're going to continue with our Becoming Your Own Banker series. And I am flying solo as my son could not be here with me today, but that's okay. He'll be back in the future. We're going to look at page 12, and we're going to be discussing specifically how the infinite banking concept got started. So I am particularly excited about this one today because I think it's fascinating to look at Nelson Nash's life and see how he came to discover the infinite banking concept. So let's just start by reading. I'm not going to read every word along the way, but I will start and we'll talk about it as we go. All right. So Nelson starts out. First, a bit about my background. I was educated as a forester, graduating from the University of Georgia in 1952. A large portion of the root thought of this concept is coming from the study of forest finance. I want to pause right there for a second because I think we would all admit that very few of us know much about forest finance. So a little later on in the book, Nelson will explain to us that essentially it can take 40 years to establish a financial system through forestry. Nelson was a forestry consultant, and he would talk to large landowners with timber on their land, how they could grow and replant and improve the land and eventually create a harvest. So there's an investment of time and money before you would ever actually see anything. But he says, once we have the whole system completely established, it is a fabulous income producer, but it is going to take 40 years to get it done. So you can see right off the bat, this is very much part of his long-range thinking that goes into the infinite banking concept. And the other half of this sentence here, he actually likens how the infinite banking concept is like forestry. And he says it, the fact that you are dealing with compound interest over a long period of time with no taxation on the buildup. But it takes time. And I can remember when I opened up my very first policy and I was excited to become my own banker. That first year, it was a little bit like watching grass grow. But I realize now reading this, it was actually a little bit like watching trees grow. It takes time. So he says, in the forestry world, you must think many years into the future. I worked as a forestry consultant for about 10 years. So this is where a large portion of thought is coming from. He goes on. Some of it is coming from the life insurance business. I made a good living in life insurance sales for over 30 years. Knowing how dividend-paying life insurance works is an essential ingredient to it. Most people have a minimal understanding of the subject, including the home office personnel at life insurance companies. That is strange, but very true. All right. So his life insurance sales, his knowledge of dividend-paying whole life insurance, combined with his forestry experience. And then he goes on. Lastly, It was strongly influenced by my experience in the real estate business. Timber is a form of real estate as well as the land on which it grows. So I have been around real estate for all my working life, and I developed a strong interest in the subject, studying many books on it. If you read these books, the central message is not about real estate at all. It is about the magic of leverage and how true that is. With real estate especially, it is one of the things that entices people into it. Okay, let me just give you a quick down and dirty on the leverage of real estate in case you've never experienced that before. Let's just say you have $10,000 and you're able to get into a property worth $100,000. I'm just keeping these numbers simple. Well, that property's worth $100,000. So if the real estate market goes up 5% that year, then you've just experienced an appreciation worth $5,000, but you've only invested $10,000. So what might be 5% on the property is actually a 50% return on your $10,000. That's leverage. You put in a small piece, but you get the appreciation or the growth on the whole. He goes on to say, essentially, they all say, buy some real estate, borrow the money to pay for it because you are always dealing with borrowed money. You either borrow money and pay interest, or you use your own money and give up interest that you could have earned. And this is a key point in the infinite banking concept, is understanding that opportunity cost, that you're always paying interest. There's always a cost to your capital. It says pay interest for a while, then sell the property. All you have given up is the interest you paid out. That leverage is wonderful. That is all true as long as things are going the way the financial geniuses describe it. But they never tell you what happens when the lever goes the other way. So as great as it is, everything's great until it ain't. All right. He says, frankly, I made some money in the late 70s doing it the way the geniuses explained it. Someone remarked that financial genius is a rising market. There were several successful ventures in a row, and it looked like there was no end to this bonanza. I could do no wrong. And I've seen that kind of market before when things are going up, up, up. All the newbies jump into the real estate market and they can do no wrong. And then they think it's going to be that way forever. But unfortunately, that's not usually the case. This is why Warren Buffett says things like, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. Be careful when the market looks like this. So the ventures got bigger and bigger, and I got more and more involved, buying a large number of acres of rural property. And then I got into real estate development. So Nelson got hooked on real estate. He was experiencing that rising market, that wonderful leverage. He talks about how he and his wife were even able to go to Europe in 1977 for a month. Things were going great. And I did it all according to the book by the financial geniuses, Leverage Other People's Money. There was no logical reasons not to expand. When things are going so well, why wouldn't you? And so I did. He goes on to say, at that time, the interest rate, prime at that time, was 8%. But you must pay 1.5% over prime, now referred to as the base rate. Because the bankers are not lending you money because you have real estate. They are doing it because they think you can make the payments. Why else would they require personal endorsement on the loan? And you must renew the notes every 90 days at the current interest rate. So he says, I got accustomed to paying 9.5%, and that was just normal. Well, today we would be screaming at 9.5% because that's not our normal, right? It's all relative. We've gotten accustomed to very low, I will say artificially low interest rates. But 9.5% to him at that point was normal. And then along came 1981 and 1982, and the prime rate rose and peaked at 21.5%. Add 1.5% on top of that, and you see my situation. 23% interest on $500,000. That amounts to $67,500 of interest per year that I was not expecting to pay. Now, I might add, I did a little bit of Google search on this, and the median income for people in 1981 was about $20,000. So we're talking about Nelson owing more than 3 times the average income just in interest in a year. Think about what that would look like today when you're taking into consideration inflation. He was in way over his head. He says, when this happens to you, what do? You go ask the financial geniuses who recommended that you do this. What do I do now? If you can find them, they may mumble something about selling the real estate. But where do you find a fool that will buy it under those circumstances? Of course, everything will sell if you get the price low enough, but losing 5 times what you paid for it is hardly a good way out. He says, but so far you have heard only a part of my story. The beginning of my awakening was in November 1980 when our first grandchild was born. Interest rates had begun to zoom upward. He goes on to talk about how silver and gold had increased in price. And apparently another thing that Nelson must have done was he purchased some silver. And to be fair, a lot of people do purchase gold or silver as a hedge against inflation, as a safety net, a security for a crisis situation. You can always count on silver and gold during a crisis. Well, for poor Nelson, who might have otherwise thought to himself, well, at least maybe some of my silver stores will help me out. Well, he says, while my wife was visiting our new granddaughter some 60 miles away for several days, the thieves broke into our house at 3 p.m. and quote unquote cleaned us out. So now Nelson doesn't even have his silver to help him out. 2 months later, as if things couldn't get worse, my 52-year-old brother dropped dead from a heart attack while playing racquetball with his son. 5 months later, our second granddaughter was born out in Hawaii. 5 weeks later, her parents discovered that the baby had cancer. I didn't even know that babies could get cancer. About this point, don't you hear the desperation in Nelson's voice? It's one of those situations where I'm sure he felt like if anything could go wrong, it was all going wrong. He does say his story has a good part. She's now 25 years old and is cured as of the writing of this book in 2000, and we have seen a miracle. So thanks be to God for that. But he says for the bad financial news, it was that summer that interest rates went to 23%. And there I stood owing $500,000 under those circumstances. He says, when a number of bad things like this occurs in fairly rapid succession, it can increase the quality of your prayer life dramatically. And I'm sure it would. The basic idea revealed in the infinite banking concept was born over a period of many, many months at 3 to 4 a.m. in the kneeling position, praying, Lord, please show me a way out of this financial nightmare that I have created for myself. And the answer came back about like a baseball bat across the eyes. He said, you are standing in the midst of everything it takes to get out, but you don't see it because you look at things like everyone else. Right here, you can hear Nelson, the first inkling of his rethink your thinking. Stop looking at things like everyone else does. He goes on to say, you can get to money during these awful times at 5 to 8% from 3 different life insurance companies through policies that you own. The only thing that limits how much you can get to is the same thing they tell you at the bank when you ask them, how big of a check can you write? How much have you put in? Okay, so that too is a key piece. He's realizing I can access capital from my life insurance companies that I already own at only 5 to 8%. And then I could pay off the banks with it. The only problem is I can only access as much as I have already put in, which makes him realize he's going to need to put more in. Okay, so he goes on. If I had not been accustomed to paying very large premiums, it is doubtful that I would have seen this message. So here we see he has already been accustomed to paying very large premiums. Hardship, he says, often helps us to see things which we normally are blind to. It was evident to me that I needed to increase my life insurance premiums dramatically to create a pool of cash values from which to borrow to pay off the bankers that I owed. So here's a guy who says he's already accustomed to paying very large premiums, but he realizes he needed to be paying even higher premiums. But now he's in this debt situation. He owes the bank $500,000. So he says, how do I do both? He needs to pay off the bankers, but he now also realizes that the solution is to increase his premiums. How in the world is he going to do both? This is the same question I think almost every new person to the infinite banking concept thinks. How in the world am I going to do that? I've already got all this going on over here. I can't afford to pay these high premiums. You're wanting me to squeeze into my budget line item a high premium? How in the world? I can't afford that. That is the common response. Well, let me ask you, what kind of situation was Nelson in? Did he have all of his financials all buttoned up and tidied up? No, he was in a financial mess. He was way over leveraged, over his head in debt when he discovered this. And yet he's asking the question, how could I do both? And here comes the answer. So hang on to your hat, take out a pen, underline this one, write it down. Because he says, honest introspection revealed that I could revise my spending pattern. Now, do you hear in there? Maybe you think this at first blush. I need to tighten my belt. I need to stop spending. I need to stop getting coffee at the local coffee shop. That's not what he says. He says, I could revise my spending pattern. That's different than revising your spending. Now, no doubt in Nelson's situation, he was being more careful with his finances. But that wasn't the key. He had no way to squeeze his belt tight enough to solve this problem. This was way beyond being a little more careful with your money. He had to revise his spending pattern. And what he means by this is he had to pay that premium first. So if he's going to increase the amount of premium he's paying in order to create a larger store of cash values from which he can borrow against to pay off these bankers, and he knew that's what he needed to do, then he realized that he needed to take one detour with every bit of income that he would receive to pay as much premium as he could, and then he could borrow against those cash values and begin to take over the debts from the bankers. And that's exactly what he did. Now, I want to caution you because in the next two sentences, he says, this was a starting place. When I started teaching others to design their financial dealings along these lines, my income tripled. So it'd be real easy to read these sentences and think, okay, he revised his spending pattern. That means he tightened his belt. Oh, and then he wound up tripling his income and he made 3 times as much money. And that's how he got himself out of this problem. But that's not how he got himself out of this problem. He learned to pay premium first to make that first diversion of his income and then borrow against it to pay the bankers off. I believe that there was many years in between his saying, I could revise my spending pattern and my income tripled. And the reason I say that is because he says it was about a decade when he started trying to teach this concept to people. And for the longest time, people thought he was crazy. People would say they would show up and then they wouldn't. He went through many years of disappointment, of the doors being shut in his face. Even at the life insurance companies, they would laugh at him. They thought he was crazy. He goes on to say this. He says, practically everyone thought I was crazy. It was opposite to what all the experts said. You see, he's not thinking like everyone else anymore. But an objective look at the facts of how life insurance worked, remember he knew that, plus reason and logic, of course I believe his forestry background, thinking long term, and continued sessions of intense prayer for guidance has proved that the system works. Because Nelson did eventually get all of the, as he liked to call them, snakes and dragons out of his life. He got the banks out of his life. He got himself out of this incredible situation. And in fact, it is my understanding that he not only got himself out of his own $500,000 in debt, he took over his partner's debts as well, who had claimed bankruptcy, because that was just a matter of principle to him. He did not want to claim bankruptcy. So he climbed his way out of this using the infinite banking concept that he discovered in this way at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning on his knees in prayer. So this last little paragraph here is a bit of encouragement for all of us who think we have to be wealthy to become our own banker. We have to be in a nice, tidy, wonderful financial situation to become our own banker. Here's what he says. Maybe you have found yourself in such a financial prison, or maybe you want to develop a system that will keep you out. Either way, maybe yours is smaller or greater, whatever, doesn't matter. The principles are the same and they will serve you well. It requires understanding and it requires discipline to implement the idea, but it can change your life dramatically, even beyond your fondest dreams. So I feel like I should just leave you with that because Nelson says it best. But if you're thinking that your financial situation is beyond repair, consider Nelson's situation and you tell me. It would take a lot to beat his crisis. If he could do it, so can you. So can we all. So I want to encourage you with that. If you're ready to make a change, if you need to get out of that financial prison, or you want to make sure you never get into one, and you're ready to get started, please reach out to me at banklessbydesign.com. I would love to walk alongside you in this journey and help you implement the infinite banking concept for yourself. I hope you've enjoyed this chapter. Nelson certainly is inspiring. And if he was able to do this, let us all be encouraged that we can do it too. Until next time, I hope you have a great week. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in to the Bankless by Design podcast, where we're done with the system and we're doing money differently. Be sure to subscribe, share this episode with someone who needs it, and visit us at banklessbydesign.com to learn how you can start living bankless by design.